I have to warn you, this is not going to be a serious video. This is a video in which I will review a $30 used manual focus telephoto lens from the 60s, and I attempt to do some kind of photography with it using a modern mirrorless camera. Okay? So let's just jump into it. First of all, it's really hard to see the lens. We have to zoom out a little bit because this thing is 33 centimeters long. It's over a foot long. This lens takes up quite a bit of space in any kind of camera bag. Now, it's not that heavy as far as telephoto lenses go. It's 950 grams, which is 2.1 pounds, and it is made in Japan. However, this lens is already bulky, and it gets bulkier when you combine it with the necessary M42 adapter. So you can adapt this lens to just about any mirrorless system out there. It's not the only annoying thing about this lens, as I will demonstrate. Officially made by Hanimex, it's a tele lens f6.3 at its fastest, 400 millimeters, uses a 72 millimeter filter thread. Now, it has been referred to as the Wonder Tube on internet forums, so to keep that tradition going, that's what we're going to call it as well. It was also released under other names, including Mamiya, Tokina, Petri, and maybe some other brands that I haven't even heard of. Okay, so this lens design is not just unique to the Hanimex brand. They're obviously not available new anymore. This thing was made in the 60s. It's a very simple design, 4 elements in 3 groups, and actually features a tripod collar here, which you can't remove, but you can rotate. If you plan to use this lens with a tripod or monopod, I guess that's handy to have. The focus throw on this lens is quite substantial. To get from infinity to its minimum focusing distance of 9 meters, okay, requires a couple of turns. Do you have a conception of how far away something is when it's 9 meters away? Because after using this lens, I have a very good idea of what 9 meters is. And the most annoying thing about this lens, when you try to use it for wildlife, is you actually have to walk away from the wildlife, because unless you're 9 meters away, you are too close to it. It's positive for not disturbing wildlife, but not that great if you're trying to get up close and personal with it. Now, this lens has a preset mechanism for setting the aperture. In practical terms, if we're adapting it to mirrorless, it's not a necessary mechanism to have. If you set this front ring to f11, it means you will not be able to stop the lens down any more than f11. This thing is large, it's unwieldy, and the image quality certainly doesn't live up to its size. But given the fact that it's a $30 lens, I think a lot can be forgiven. The rest of the review will be done while taking a look at some sample pictures, because I'm sure you guys are curious as to what kind of results are possible with this lens. Even though it's f6.3 and that may seem like a slow aperture to you guys, if you're decently close to your subject and the background is far away, you can get perfectly fine separation. The bokeh is not life-changing on this lens, but it's not horrible either. The biggest issue, aside from the minimum focusing distance, is the insane amount of chromatic aberration, purple fringing that you get, especially when you shoot this thing wide open into high contrast areas. The lens isn't that sharp wide open, okay? It requires some sharpening to even become acceptable. I would recommend shooting it at something like f8, f11 if possible. Obviously, that severely cuts down on the light available to you, and given the fact that there's no image stabilization going on, you're reliant on either your camera having IBIS. In this case, my Nikon Z5 actually does have inbuilt image stabilization. You need to make sure that your shutter speeds are fast enough to not only account for camera shake, but also account for subject motion. So as you can see here, I have a couple of failed images of squirrels in the park, and that's mostly to do with not shooting at a fast enough shutter speed. Of course, I didn't want to dip into ISOs above 10,000 because I was also mindful of the noise. All in all, this was a very illuminating exercise because it just highlighted how important having a decent minimum focusing distance is, as well as all the advances that we've made in recent years with telephoto technology. Nevertheless, back in the day, people had to use manual focus, and especially with film, I can only imagine how tricky it was to get any kind of in-focus shots. So I would say keep your expectations low, watch those shutter speeds, don't use this lens for street photography, because when you put it on top of a camera, I mean, it just looks like you're holding some kind of field mortar. I would consider myself a confident person, but even I was insecure holding this giant camera plus lens package and trying to do any kind of street photography with it. Now, using this lens in the field is quite tricky. What I tend to do is set it to around f8. Okay, that way I know there's going to be sufficient depth of field for basic wildlife uses. Set it to focus on something near, approximating the distance, and then you have to be very quick. Using the focus peaking of your mirrorless camera, be very quick to nail the focus before the subject leaves the focal plane. Okay, this is very tricky. After you use one of these lenses, you will really appreciate all the wonders of modern autofocus. Did I have fun using this lens? Sort of. I did not enjoy the 9-meter minimum focusing distance. I did, however, really enjoy using this lens at the zoo, because at a zoo you're always going to be a good distance away from the animals and they're not moving too fast, and you can kind of sit there and slowly manually focus on them until you get acceptable results. I was actually able to get a couple pictures of the zoo that I'm completely happy with. Again, guys, this lens is not going to be better than even your basic 70 to 300 or 55 to 250 kind of lens, but for $30, I don't think we can complain. Thank you guys for making it all the way through this video, and as always, subscribe for more. The market is full of these manual telephotos from yesteryear, and on this slide I wanted to show you guys some alternatives. Some alternatives that are also on the affordable side. They will, however, require some kind of lens to mirrorless adapter if you're planning to adapt them. If you spend too much money on these lenses, keep in mind that that money could have gone towards a much newer autofocus lens, which would just make your life a whole lot easier and not riddle you with insane amounts of chromatic aberration.